Feminist Funk. Today, our fed up feminists discuss
She-Ra
and the ethics of technology. Welcome to the Feminist Funk podcast. My name is Mel.
and I'm Ashley.
And today we're going to be talking about the ethics of technology in She-Ra. Specifically the reboot, which is a Netflix original. If you haven't seen it, you should probably watch it before listening to this podcast because we're going to be talking about a couple of nitty-gritty details and we want you to be able to follow along.
Yeah. And if you haven't heard our other She-Ra podcast, please check that out as well, where we talk about the characters, the overarching plot, etc., in greater detail.
So we're going to be talking about two main things in this podcast. We're going to be talking about Entrapta, the princess who can control her hair and use them as hands. And then we're also going to be talking about the first one's technology. So the interesting thing about Entrapta is, like she says, she's on the side of science. She's sort of chaotic neutral. Whoever has the best tech, she's going to be on that side. You could think that, you know, her feelings were hurt by her friends abandoning her. And sure, I think that was the case. But I think what's mostly keeping her with the Horde is the fact that they have all this technology, especially now that she's helping Hordak try to create a portal. She's like, oh my god, this is only like theoretically possible. Blah, blah, blah. You know, you see like the gears turning in her head.
Even when she's in drill, she has some of these like put humans second, robots first kind of mentality, right? She's like revamped her entire castle to be a labyrinth that's mostly navigatable by robots. She ends up using an artifact that ends up essentially being a virus that corrupts all the robots. And like, to be fair, the first time she uses it, she doesn't know it's going to do that, but then she keeps it afterward. So there's definitely some of that like science above all else kind of mentality. Like she's aware of the consequences, but it's also kind of screw the consequences if it means we can learn more.
There's basically like two main points of view when it comes to technology and the advancement of society. We teach composition to engineers, and a lot of them in their papers that we grade just assume that the advancement of technology is the advancement of society, and they don't really care about the ethics or how the technology can be used. I'm thinking specifically of, just to give you an example, there's this program that was created, I don't remember where or when, but it's like face identification, and they were trying to figure out what facial signs you can see to determine if people are queer or not. And it's like, do you realize how this technology could be implemented in places like Russia? Like, think before you create. And then, yeah, there's the other branch, which is like, think before you create this technology. Just because you're creating a new technology doesn't inherently mean that it's better for society.
Yeah.
So Entrapta falls into this category of inventor that thinks that any advancement of science is inherently an advancement for society.
It's almost treating technology as apolitical, which it's not. That's the thing. It's being used by society at large, but ultimately that is what politics are. It's interactions between people, right? And you don't know how something will end up being used. And that happens constantly, right? I mean, the idea of nuclear fission, for example, when it was first invented, was first discovered, I should say. No one would have quite envisioned that it would lead to the atomic bomb, as an example. There's the idea of identifying genetic anomalies as well. And there are certainly people who are looking into identifying a queer gene, so to speak, or any other kind of gene. And while on the one hand it's good to understand these things and know them, you do have to think of the consequences. They are not apolitical. Like, just technology, science in general is just not neutral. On the other hand, you also can just be afraid of it. Like, there's the other side of the coin is just like being irrationally afraid and like sort of putting down all science. And that's just what anti-vaxxers do. So there's these two extremes that you have to avoid. Unfortunately, Entrapta, is more along the lines of science is a good thing. Science probably can do no wrong, or science will fix any problems that exist. It is very strange that she doesn't seem to ever question this. She's a princess. She should. She's the leader of her people, or at least she's the ruler of a town. She has to be responsible, but at the same time, you don't see her ever really thinking about the impact on other human lives.
So there's this philosophy from Aristotle, but also Buddha. I prefer to think of it in terms of Buddha. Anyway, it's the idea of the golden mean or the middle path.
Yeah.
Which is basically you don't want to be on either extremes of anything, right? When it comes to, for example, bravery, this is one that Aristotle uses. If you're too brave, you're throwing yourself into danger without thinking. It's just recklessness. But if you're not brave at all, then you're a coward and you're not defending people when you need to defend them. So you need to find that golden mean. And it's the same thing with science. You know, you don't want to be an anti-vaxxer because you should just understand how basic science works. What is so complicated about vaccines? Like if you just think about it for 2 seconds, and the worst is those people that are like, I think that we should, hear both sides of the debate. No. Do not give these people a platform. No. Okay, literally, it will do no good. Mm-mm. Your argument is not even valid. I don't even want to hear it.
It's based largely on a debunked paper, which is ridiculous.
And the person who published that paper only created this false data because they wanted to get published.
Yeah, that's it.
And again, that brings us back to think about your actions and think about how they are going to impact society, which Entrapta does not do. And she embodies this trope of the mad scientist.
She is honestly the perfect example of a mad scientist, like where it wouldn't be terribly far off. And I think there might even be a scene like this in the show, but I don't remember. To see her kind of a la Dr. Frankenstein, where she's just like in a room and lightning strikes something and she's like, it's alive. Honestly, I could just envision them doing that with Entrapta. But the whole point of her, in many ways, is just this fanaticism, right? First, every time she's in the fright zone, she ends up reprogramming one of their robots and giving it a name. And on the one hand, that's very sweet. She sees kind of robots or AI or whatever you prefer as this kind of humanoid thing, and it's kind of cutesy. But on the other hand, there are just serious ramifications about that. And she does it, within 2 seconds. She ends up using it. Emily ends up being very useful to her. But nonetheless, she is just zany. And it's that zany stereotype that comes up so often in media again and again. It's been coming around since, the mid to early 1800s. Mm-hmm. And it's ridiculous. And it is this response to kind of scientific enlightenment in many ways.
The one thing that's different, though, between Entrapta and the classic crazy scientist is a lot of crazy scientists, I feel like some of them think that they're doing good. It's kind of warped in their mind, like Frankenstein. Not Frankenstein's monster.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Frankenstein.
Dr. Frankenstein. He thinks that he's helping society by creating this technology of bringing people back to life from corpses. And he only realizes the ramifications later on in the book, where he starts having nightmares about women, and kind of it makes him think about, oh God, well, if we can reanimate corpses, then what do we need women for? Mm-hmm. And then when his monster kills his fiance and he realizes, oh my God, this technology is actually dangerous, and he wants me to create a wife for him, and then there'll be more of them out there.
Yeah.
That's when he's like, oh shit, I fucked up. So I think that's the difference between the stereotypical crazy scientist who actually thinks that they're doing good, even thinking of this cult French movie,
Les yeux sans visage.
Yeah. This scientist is stealing people's faces, but he's doing it to help his daughter who doesn't have a face.
I think that's the thing. Mad scientists have their own moral code, and I think Entrapta does too. But her moral code just has to do with saving technology. Because she reacts very badly when you abuse tech. When you abuse the things that she's created, she's not very happy about it. I think there are a few instances where people are going to destroy things, and she's very, very bothered by that. Actually, it's in season 2, now that I'm thinking about it, when she had created those updated cyborgs that She-Ra, Glimmer, and Bo end up attacking.
She's I can't look.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this emotional attachment that she has. And so in a interesting way, and I think this is maybe precluded to something I'll mention in a moment. Her moral code is really based on not just that all science is good, but also preserving all science is for the best. Case of humanity in some weird way.
But it comes at the expense of people.
Literally, yeah. But I think she almost sees robots as more people than people.
Which is scary.
Yeah.
as a humanist.
Yeah. No, it is. But I was thinking, because it stuck with me so much, in the episode where you first meet her, you see a picture of her as a child in the castle in Drill. And her parents are two robots.
Ooh.
Which begs the question, who were her actual biological parents in this case?
Mm-hmm.
So clearly they must have died, and either they left cyborgs to take care of her, or she created them. So she doesn't have a very human connection. She was essentially raised by electronics, in a sense, which has led to this very skewed perception. But you are right, like, it's... prior mad scientists are about the humanity aspect. Either a specific person or, like, this grander ideal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why that's what I think makes her interesting, because she is this old trope, but they put a modern spin on it with AI and, like, the love of robots.
Yes. And she's also, well, it's like a female scientist. You don't really see a lot of female mad scientists.
And she's pretty, which I love. It's like, yes, thank you. But actually, okay, this is super interesting. Because I actually watched all of She-Ra in German the first time I watched it. And I only rewatched it in English when we were going to do the podcast. Because I was like, why not?
Yeah.
And in German, Entrapta has like a normal person voice. And I was like, it is so refreshing to have this woman who's just, you know, a beautiful woman, but still really intelligent. Because a lot of the times when you have scientists, there's this one scientist who, she invented something for computers. She was really good at computers, but she was also, I think, a cabaret dancer or something like that.
Oh, I don't know who this is.
And people didn't take her seriously. And she said, I wish I was born ugly so I could be taken seriously. And I just learned of another instance as well. This other burlesque dancer who was actually a very talented writer. And up till now, her novels have been largely ignored because people didn't actually believe that she wrote it because she was too pretty.
Oh, wow, okay.
So it was so refreshing to see Entrapta, who's like, you know, not this like stereotypical, unattractive academic scientist type of person, but actually like a beautiful person in German with her normal voice. And then when I watched it in English, I was so disappointed that they made her sound so annoying and nasally, and it just undid all of the fucking work that they did in German, apparently.
You know, she's very much so meant to be caricaturized in the original. Like, her like obsession with like small little foods and fuzzy drinks and then the voice. What I find really interesting about Entrapta is she very much so marches to the beat of her own drum. She doesn't dress quite like the other princesses do. To be fair, all the princesses have their own unique sense of style, which I really love about She-Ra to begin with. But Entrapta is just in stuff that's comfy and in stuff that makes sense for what she does. So I do love that about her, but yeah, her nasally voice is perhaps its own kind of issue.
Yeah. That has nothing to do with the writing, though. It's like whoever decided, like, yeah, you're going to be the voice actor for...
Well, I think outside of the main trio and, like, the Horde people, all of the princesses have very... voices that you'd almost expect for the particular princess they were. Like, okay, to be fair, maybe not Mermista. She just sounds bored all the time, but she's like that disaffected teenager. Perfuma sounds like this, like, hippie... Yeah, Frosta kind of, especially in season 1, sounds really frosty. And then you have Entrapta, who's like the zany one, so she has the zany voice. So I feel like the princesses, their voice actors got very...
They did.
Yeah.
It was better in German.
Okay, well,
that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
They still were able to capture, like, the hippiness of the hippie one, but less so. It was more subtle. And I really appreciated that people weren't just...
In many ways, they just caricaturized.
Yeah, exactly. It was really refreshing in German that they weren't caricaturized, because all of the characters were so, I'm thinking specifically of like Glimmer and Scorpia. It was so nice and refreshing to have all of these different body types. And I feel like by caricaturizing the voices, they kind of take away from that subversiveness a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think that just ends up happening in a lot of animated TV, though, I think. Like, if this were live action, I don't know how it would go in live action, to be fair.
Oh,
if it were,
don't do that.
Yeah.
No.
If it were, no one wants that, please don't. No. But if it were live action, they probably wouldn't have the voices. I feel like in animated form, that's usually what ends up happening. Like, when I was younger, I used to watch Winx Club a lot, which was originally in Italian, but then got translated into English by 4Kids. It was great. But they had that caricaturization, because each of them, they were fairies, each of them were associated with a specific kind of element. So one person was into tech. One person was into flowers. One of them was like associated with the sun and was more of like a valley girl. So like all of them had voices that matched with that stereotype. So I think it might just be the nature of certain kinds of animated TV.
I'm still not giving it a carte blanche.
No, I know. I'm not saying give it one. I'm just saying that I feel like that's the rationalization behind it. That being said, it's interesting to think, actually, I could bring that up further, because the character who was associated with technology in Winx Club, her name was Tecna. Most inventive thing imaginable. She was not like Entrapta. She was very into technology, but her whole role as this fairy was kind of a superhero character. So she did not do that at the expense of other people. And so that was interesting, because she didn't fulfill that mad scientist stereotype while still being a woman who was into tech. And that was really fascinating. Her boyfriend was the typical geek, granted. Like, he was the geek who was into tech, and I was like, okay, well, whatever, you do you. But it was interesting how she didn't fall into that stereotype. So it's fascinating to see Entrapta do that. Given that this is like 10, 15 years on from that other show. I don't know how she was in the 1980s. In the 1980s, I don't think she even was shown as being like a part of the rebellion before. She was just already with the Horde. So I don't know what they did with her there. Maybe there's some like leftover trappings from that, which is why they ended up being that way. Like, do you remember her from the show?
I never watched Shira, the original.
Oh, okay.
It was too like, I didn't even want to watch the reboot until like you convinced me to watch it, because male gazy, like, ugh, no thanks.
But then it's not. It's so fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I find it interesting though that on one hand you have Entrapta, but then you also have the One's tech, and like Entrapta is obsessed with the One's tech, but we know that One's tech is supposed to be used for good. It's supposed to be used for balance. The whole planet is this technology.
Yeah.
And so I find that interesting that we have Entrapta on one side, who is just like technology for the sake of technology. But then you have Shira, or like the previous Shira, who Myra, I think was her name, who like went crazy with all of this power because she actually cared about people and she felt that pressure, which Entrapta does not feel at all. No. She just does not give a shit. So the juxtaposition there is really interesting.
Yeah. It really is. It's funny because technology really shows up in 3 separate instances in the show, right? There's the first one's tech, there's Entrapta and Drill, and then there's the Horde. Everyone else, it's magic. And so it's fascinating to sort of see that, yeah, for the first ones, to be fair, their civilization got to the point where they had this technology. But it's like, it was almost a part of everyday life. It could be used for balance. Like, that is what Shira was meant for. And that's what the crystals were originally meant for, too. Like, you are in control of the elements. That means you can kind of control rain, sun. You can basically make a kind of perfect life. Then, yeah, to be fair, Myra ends up becoming... not unhinged, that's not quite the right word, but she ends up sort of taking that out on the first ones.
Yeah, overwhelmed.
Yeah. We don't exactly know how, and then all of them left because of her abuse of technology. And then, yeah, you have the Horde who are doing the exact same thing. They're abusing the technology. They're effectively poisoning the land. They're doing all these different things. And it's not quite the repeat of the first ones, because that's not what their intention is. But at the same time, they're misusing tech in a very similar way that Myra did. So it is interesting how much of a warning comes with technology and its potential for abuse.
And I think that's what's so great about the show, is that it doesn't hit you over the head with it. You really have to think about it and pay attention, and then you notice all of these different points of view and themes when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
So it's really nice that they don't dumb it down for the audience, you know. They respect you enough to put in these themes and let you figure it out for yourself and let you figure out how you feel about it for yourself, too.
I think, like, Avatar was very good about that as well. Because, especially in the first season, there was a very big association between technology and Fire Nation.
So, Avatar the Airbender, just to...
Yeah. I would say ADLA, but, like, most people don't know the acronym. So, like, Avatar the Last Airbender, yeah. So, Avatar the Last Airbender, from the get-go, you associate technology with the Fire Nation. They're the ones with the most advanced warships. They're the ones with very advanced weaponry, etc., etc. what ends up being interesting, though, as the show progresses, is that you have Sokka, who works as a counterbalance, sort of showing, through his engagements with other people who are also using tech, the benefits of technology on society. And I think that's very interesting. Mm-hmm. So you have a sort of balanced view. And then, yeah, it's the exact same thing with Bo in She-Ra, who, you have Entrapta, she kind of goes crazy with that little thing. Not crazy, that's not the right word. She sort of goes overboard with her love of technology. But then you have Bo, who is thinking of different ways that it could be used for the rebellion, to be fair.
Exactly.
And it's a lot more toned down.
Mm-hmm. And the problem with Entrapta is not that she's passionate, that's a good thing.
Exactly.
It's just that she's so passionate that she stops being critical about it.
Yeah. Again, there's a certain, I believe the term is like technological somnambulism?
Yes, I think that's it too, yeah.
Yeah. Where there's like, it's almost like a sleepwalking through technology because you're not ethically engaging with it. And that's just how she is.
Exactly.
I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't gotten captured by the Horde. I feel like eventually she would have just...
I get that feeling, like... Yeah.
Yeah. You even see it in season 1 with her obsession with studying humans, which I think is really interesting. When she goes to the princess prom and she's walking around and like taking notes on people, which, to be fair, is just her character, is like their way of making her quirky. But I do think it's very interesting that there are points of study, that she is not engaging with them.
I mean, it just reminded me of a sociologist, really.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, she's not out with humans a lot.
No.
You know, like, she just lives with her robots, so for her, it's really fascinating.
It is,
It would be like us encountering a new species and studying how they interact with each other.
I love armchair sociology. I do it all the time. But it's like, it's striking an interesting balance, right? So she's interesting in that sense because, it is like encountering a whole new species to her. She is not very familiar with humans and impacts on them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the last person we should talk about in terms of technology is Hordak. I don't remember if it's season 1 or season 2, but at one point we actually see his body and we see how frail he is. And the only thing holding him together and making him intimidating is technology.
Yeah. He's very interested in kind of combining biotics with, or the biology with the with technology. And it is really fascinating. Even his little imp, actually, now that I think about it, records people and records things. And we don't know if it's a natural ability or an augmentation that he put in.
That's true.
Yeah. But it is true that Hordak uses technology to hide his weakness. Actually, that brings up an interesting idea about like augmentation in human beings, which I think is a topic that often comes up in sci-fi. I'm thinking of like Deus Ex Machina, which is a game that does that a lot with the main character and with a variety of other characters. And there's an interesting ethical component to that in the grander scheme of things. Like we see prosthetics a lot in real life, obviously. Not so much in the show, which is interesting for a world that's been at war for a while. But effectively, he has prosthetics in some sense, and he's using them in a very particular way. How do you feel about it?
Well, that's the thing. It brings up the question of, like, sure, we can use biotech for equity for people with disabilities, but then the problem is what happens when you have people who don't have a disability, who want to use biotech just for augmentation. That essentially, like, have, like, these superpowers above other people. And you can be naive and think, like, oh, that would be great. Everybody could do heavy lifting. No. That's not how it works. In real life, the only people who are going to be able to afford this are the rich people.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have even more fucking power than they already do.
Yeah.
So, I'm personally in favor of biotech as far as helping people who need help, but I'm afraid it's going to get out of control. The thing is, you would need really strict regulations, and then you would actually have to have a way to enforce those regulations. I think, like, the best thing, ideally, moving on into the future is we'd have to have some sort of a global government, like in Futurama.
Right.
With actual laws for everybody, and with actual, like, repercussions when you don't do good for everybody. And then it would have to be uncorruptible. So this is obviously extremely idealistic. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I think this is what would need to happen to keep not the technology itself in check, but to keep the kind of people who want to abuse it in check.
Yeah. I think that's the big thing. Where is the technology going? Who is using it in the grander scheme of things? If you're using it to better people's quality of life in a very general sense. For people who really do need it to kind of create a sense of equity, then yes, that's fine. If it can be abused in some other way, then yeah. Which is always the case with technology, right, in terms of our fear. There's another great film that sort of deals with that, and it's not about augmentation necessarily, but it's called Gattaca, and it's about genetic engineering.
Oh god, yeah, that's another big one. That's gonna be... You're basically gonna end up with a fucking race of rich superhumans, and then those of us who are left behind are gonna be stuck doing the manual labor, and then you're gonna have, like, racism, but racism between, like, superhumans and non-superhumans, and yeah, you're basically gonna get the German film Metropolis.
Yeah. Well, that's basically it. Gattaca and Metropolis is the exact same kind of premise, right? And so this augmentation follows a similar thing. Who has access to it? And the thing is that, like, if you're someone with disabilities, you often don't necessarily have the funds to pay for something that would make your life better, right? So it is a continuous cycle of thing. I don't know how Hordak would use it. I mean, I think it's interesting that he gave his own... I think he must have created something for Shadow Weaver, her helmet, with that has a piece of the Black Garnet inside of it, because she's very, very weak once her connection with the Black Garnet is gone. And I get the sense that the way that her mask kind of functions ends up being very similar to this piece of biotech, because it interfaces technology, which interfaces with the Black Garnet with her. And so he has already privileged her by giving it to her, right? It's not a prosthetic. It's a very different thing. Arguably, after the whole incident, while she was Light Hope with those shadow things, she could not function physically, so she needed something. So that kind of prosthetic, yes, it could have been, but we don't really know. But you can already see it at work in the Horde, the way he has used biotech to prioritize certain individuals. And that is very concerning. Yeah. He does the same thing with the original Catra, her mask that she has. In the original 1980s show, it did not belong to Hordak. He had stolen it from the head of the Beast People. And he'd given it to Catra because she was his second in command. He's like, okay, well, this is your sign of power. Take it. And basically, it turned her into a cat. Like, it turned into a panther, I guess, which is hence the whole, like, Catra thing. Okay. Because she was a human, but then she could turn into an animal. Like, now she's not quite that anymore. But Hordak does kind of work that way automatically. He tends to prioritize. Whoever are in positions of power, they get access to biotech. I really hope he doesn't give one to Entrapta. Oh, God.
Oh boy, can you imagine Entrapta with even more powers? She would be really fucking scary.
At that point, just, like, put her in the desert. Let her do her thing. She'll be fine. She won't bother anybody, hopefully.
What do you think about the technology in She-Ra? Did we forget to cover something? Tell us in the comments.
As always, if you like this, please like and subscribe.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Girl, I'm so sorry.